Almost everybody over 60 has had some version of the same conversation in front of the freezer. I should keep easy things in the house. I should have something healthy for the nights I do not want to cook. I should make this simpler. And honestly, that instinct is smart. The freezer can save you money, save you time, and keep you from ordering the kind of dinner that does real damage in a hurry. What nobody explains clearly is that frozen food is not one category. It is two completely different worlds living behind the same cold door. One world is the plain, honest stuff. Frozen peas, frozen berries, frozen spinach, frozen fish fillets. The other world is the healthy food industry in a cardboard sleeve. The bowl with the green label, the soup with the wholesome font, the plant-based patty with the halo around it, the smoothie pack that looks like wellness and eats like dessert. And 5 of those foods, bought for the exact reason people think they are protecting themselves, can quietly work against the 2 organs most people over 60 are trying hardest to preserve: the heart and the brain. Let me be precise with you, because there is a lot of lazy nonsense on the internet about frozen food. Freezing itself is not the problem. Freezing is one of the best preservation methods we have. In many cases, frozen vegetables are nutritionally excellent because they are picked, processed, and frozen quickly. Frozen fruit is fine. Frozen fish is fine. Some frozen meals are perfectly reasonable. This is not one of those "never buy anything from the freezer aisle again" videos, because that would be dishonest. The difference between the foods that help you and the foods that hurt you is usually not the temperature. It is what was added before the freeze and what the front of the box convinced you not to look at. And before you click off because you think this is going to be another lecture about preservatives from somebody who has never actually had to cook for one person, give me a minute, because the real answer is much more practical than that. The freezer is not the villain in this story. In a strange way, the freezer is the hero. I will tell you exactly which frozen foods I would still keep in my own house at the end. I'm Dr. Naturis. I'm an internal medicine specialist, and after enough years of seeing people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, you notice a very specific pattern. The foods patients call healthy are often healthier in the advertisement than they are in the body. And nowhere is that truer than the freezer aisle, because the marketing is doing one thing and the label is doing another. So today, 5 foods. One of them is sitting in the freezer of almost every person who lives alone. One of them gets bought by people trying to lower their cholesterol. One of them wears the words plant-based like a medical degree. And the 5th one is the one that fools the most intelligent people because it looks cleaner than it is. All right, one idea before the list, because once you have it, you can work out the answer for almost any frozen food without me standing next to you in the grocery store. When a food is frozen in its plain state, that is mostly a storage method. The pea is still a pea. The blueberry is still a blueberry. The salmon is still salmon. But when a manufacturer turns that food into a healthy convenience product, the game changes. Now they are solving for shelf life, texture, sweetness, craveability, sodium, reheating, and the peculiar way a food has to perform after being frozen, thawed, and heated in a microwave. And that process tends to do 3 things that matter a great deal after 60. 1. It loads salt. Sodium is the easiest way to make packaged food taste like more than it is. And sodium after 60 lands differently than it did at 35. Blood pressure generally rises with age. Arteries are less forgiving. Kidneys are less forgiving. The FDA is very plain about this. Diets higher in sodium are associated with higher blood pressure, and high blood pressure harms the heart, kidneys, brain, and eyes. The CDC says the same thing and adds the other half of the truth most people miss. Most sodium is not coming from the salt shaker. It is coming from packaged and prepared foods. So if a healthy frozen meal quietly gives you a third, half, sometimes more of a day's sodium, that food has just turned into a blood pressure story whether you meant it to or not. 2. It spikes and distorts. A lot of these products are built on refined starches, added sugars, and fast carbohydrates wrapped in healthy language. Whole grain on the front, honey on the picture, fruit in the name. But once it hits the body, the question is not the picture on the box. The question is how hard it pushes blood sugar and triglycerides, and how often you repeat that pattern. And after 60, a lot of you are managing pre-diabetes, diabetes, fatty liver, high triglycerides, central weight gain, or the sort of fasting glucose that makes your doctor begin a sentence with, "Let's just keep an eye on this." The brain lives downstream of that. The heart lives downstream of that. 3. It crowds out real food while carrying the baggage of ultra-processing. And I want to be scientifically honest about this because the research here is growing, but it is not magic. We do not have a trial where we randomize human beings to frozen bowls until dementia falls out of the sky. What we do have is a growing stack of observational data linking high ultra-processed food intake with higher risks of cardiovascular disease, stroke, and cognitive decline. A recent NIH summary of one of the largest analyses reported that the highest ultra-processed food intake was associated with a 17% higher cardiovascular disease risk, a 23% higher coronary heart disease risk, and a 9% higher stroke risk. Separate research in older adults has found higher dementia risk in people with the highest intake of ultra-processed foods. That does not mean one frozen dinner causes Alzheimer's. Anyone who says that is selling you fear. The true version is smaller and more useful. These foods fit into a pattern, and patterns repeated across years are what change the odds. Salt, spikes, and substitution. That is the whole mechanism for today. Every one of the 5 frozen foods gets scored against those 3. Number 1, and this is the one most people buy with completely good intentions, healthy frozen dinners and grain bowls, the low-calorie tray, the Mediterranean bowl, the lean chicken rice thing with the little green leaf on the front. The one you bought because you were too tired to cook, and at least it was not pizza. I will say the good part first because it is true and it matters. Portion control is real. Convenience matters. For some people, especially people living alone, a frozen meal is what stands between them and not eating at all, or eating crackers for dinner, or ordering something much worse. I am not here to insult anybody's real life. But what a lot of people discovered too late is that light usually refers to calories, not sodium. Lean is not the same thing as heart safe, and made with vegetables is not a blood pressure exemption. Go pick up enough of those boxes and you start seeing the same pattern. Sodium numbers that are absurd for the amount of food you are holding. A sauce carrying half the chemistry. Tiny trays with more salt than a person would ever add at home because nobody cooking in their own kitchen would look at a half cup of rice, 6 bites of chicken, and some glazed vegetables and think, you know what this needs? Another 700 milligrams of sodium. And the heart-brain part is not abstract. High blood pressure is the most important treatable risk factor for stroke. The American Heart Association could not be clearer on that. High blood pressure damages arteries throughout the body. In the brain, it creates the conditions for a vessel to clog or rupture. In the heart, it makes the heart muscle work harder against pressure it did not ask for. After 60, that is not theory, that is plumbing. Then comes the second trick. A lot of these bowls are mostly starch-wearing accessories. White rice, refined pasta, soft grains in a sweet sauce. Not enough fiber to slow the landing, not enough protein to really anchor it. Enough sweetness or refined carbohydrate to make it easy to eat and easy to eat fast. So now your healthy dinner is salty enough to move blood pressure and soft enough to behave more like convenience food than people realize. Score it. The frozen healthy bowl is a loads food and a crowds out food. Sometimes a spikes food too, depending on what is underneath the vegetables and how sweet the sauce is. The fix is not never buy frozen dinners. The fix is to stop believing the front of the box. Turn it over. If a single tray is giving you a big chunk of the day's sodium, it is not a health food just because the cardboard is beige and calm. Use the FDA's own shortcut. 20% daily value or more of sodium is high. And then remember that most people do not eat the rest of the day on broccoli vapor and optimism. They eat breakfast, lunch, bread, condiments, snacks, soup, coffee drinks, and the sodium stacks. Number 2, frozen soup. And with it, the wholesome broth cup, the lentil tub, the chicken vegetable bowl, the just heat and sip thing people buy because soup feels gentle and safe. This one makes people argue with me because soup has one of the strongest health halos in the modern diet. Soup is what sick people eat. Soup is what older people switch to when they want to be good. Soup sounds humble. Soup sounds medically approved. And homemade soup can be fantastic. But manufactured frozen soup is one of the sneakiest sodium delivery systems in the freezer. The FDA lists soups among the biggest contributors to sodium in the American diet. That is not an accident. Liquid carries salt beautifully. Salt makes thin broth taste full. And because it is soup, people do not interrogate it. They think, it's vegetables, it's chicken, it's lentils, fine. What they do not clock is that it may be one of the fastest ways to pour a huge sodium load into the body without even feeling like you had a real meal. There is a second problem with soup, and it is behavioral. People rarely stop at the serving size if the serving size is silly. If the tub says 2 servings and the tub fits in one hand, that is one meal in the real world. No one is reheating half a respectable bowl of soup and putting the rest away like a laboratory rat with portion discipline. So the label says one thing, the body gets another, and that gap is where a lot of I eat healthy diets quietly become high sodium diets. And for the brain, I want to slow down here because this matters. People hear stroke and think catastrophe. What they do not think about is the slow vascular wear before catastrophe. Years of elevated pressure on delicate vessels, small vessel disease, tiny injuries that do not announce themselves like a movie scene, but show up later as gait changes, balance issues, processing speed, and memory. The National Institute on Aging puts it simply, controlling blood pressure helps the brain, not just the heart. In the Sprint Mind study, adults 50 and older who lowered systolic blood pressure more aggressively reduced their risk of mild cognitive impairment over 5 years. That is not glamorous. That is how prevention actually works. Score it. Frozen soup is the purest loads food in this whole video. It is not usually the worst spikes food. It is not usually the worst saturated fat story unless it is creamy. But it is a classic, this doesn't even taste that salty trap, which makes it dangerous in exactly the way older adults tend to miss. The free fix is simple. If you want frozen soup, treat it like a label reading exercise, not a morality play. And if you want the smartest version, buy plain frozen vegetables and make soup yourself from a low-sodium base. I know that sounds less convenient. It is also 5 extra minutes and a materially different food. Quick pause because we are about halfway. And this is the only favor I will ask. If you would rather have the mechanism than another list of miracle foods and superfoods, subscribe. And do me one better than that. Send this to the person in your family who says, it's healthy, it came from the freezer section with the green labels. That is the person who can actually change something tonight. Anyway, number 3 is frozen vegetables with sauce. And this one is almost unfair because it takes one of the best foods in your house and dresses it up until it behaves like something else entirely. Broccoli with cheese sauce. Green beans in garlic butter. Asian vegetables in teriyaki glaze. Creamed spinach. Cauliflower in some light white sauce that tastes like it came out of a chemistry set. Let me say this plainly because it is important. Plain frozen vegetables are one of the smartest foods you can buy. Full stop. I want them in your freezer. I recommend them all the time. They are affordable, fast, reduce waste, and make it much easier to eat plants regularly. If this video convinces you never to buy frozen vegetables, then I will have failed completely. The problem is not the frozen vegetable. The problem is the packet attached to it. That packet is usually where the sodium lives, where the sugar hides, and where the saturated fat sneaks in. And once that happens, your healthy side dish stops behaving like broccoli and starts behaving like processed sauce with broccoli involved. This is especially common with older adults because people are trying to solve a real problem. I know vegetables are good for me, but plain vegetables are boring. So manufacturers come in with the promise: butter garlic, Parmesan herb, sweet sesame, home style. Suddenly the vegetable feels easy. The issue is that the very ingredients that make it easy are the ingredients that move the heart and brain in the wrong direction when used all the time. Sodium raises pressure. Sugary glazes nudge blood sugar. Cream sauces add saturated fat. And because the food is wearing a vegetable costume, people do not count it psychologically the same way they would count a bag of chips. They count it as virtue. That is how people end up saying, "I don't understand it, doctor. I eat vegetables every night," while eating sodium-heavy sauced vegetables, a light frozen entree, and soup for lunch. There is another subtle issue here. Once you get used to heavily seasoned packaged vegetables, plain food starts tasting dull. Your palate shifts upward. That makes the rest of the week worse because now home food needs help. More sauce, more seasoning blends, more sodium. It is not just what that bag did tonight. It is what it teaches your tongue to expect on Thursday. Score it. Frozen vegetables with sauce are a loads food first, a spikes food sometimes, and a crowds out food because they replace the habit of using plain vegetables in a way you control. The fix is almost laughably simple. Buy the plain bag. Add your own olive oil, lemon, pepper, garlic, vinegar, herbs, chili flakes, Parmesan if you want it, and do it in an amount that your own hand can answer for. You will spend maybe 90 seconds more and remove most of the problem. Number 4. Plant-based frozen burgers, meatless patties, and meatless nuggets. This is the one that fools conscientious people. People who are trying, people who have heard correctly that replacing some red meat with plant foods is usually a good idea. People who are making a genuine effort to do better. I want to be careful here because I do not want the internet to hear something I did not say. Beans are excellent. Lentils are excellent. Tofu is excellent. A good old black bean burger can be a perfectly solid choice. Plant-forward eating is associated with better cardiovascular health. All of that is true. Now the second half. A frozen plant-based burger engineered to mimic meat is not the same conversation as a bowl of lentils. It is often heavily processed, often high in sodium, and sometimes surprisingly high in saturated fat because coconut oil is doing a lot of the textural work. Harvard has pointed out that some of these newer meatless burgers are heavily processed, comparable to beef in saturated fat, and significantly higher in sodium than plain ground beef or turkey. That is where people get hurt by labels. They see plant-based and mentally file it under heart protection. But from plants and good for the heart are not identical sentences. Sugar comes from plants. Tobacco comes from plants. What matters is the final object. And then we come back to the ultra-processed food question. Again, this is where I want precision, not drama. The current evidence linking ultra-processed foods to heart disease and cognitive decline is largely observational. That means it cannot prove that one product directly caused one person's outcome, but the signal is consistent enough that it deserves respect. Higher intakes of ultra-processed foods are associated with worse cardiovascular outcomes, and recent work in older adults has also found higher dementia risk among people eating the most ultra-processed food. If a person over 60 swaps whole food meals for ultra-processed fake meat products every day, under the impression that the word plant-based makes the whole thing cardiology approved, that person may be walking in exactly the wrong direction for the right reason. There is also the appetite problem. These products are often designed to be hyper-palatable. Soft texture, easy chew, strong flavor, quick preparation. That matters after 60 because a lot of you are living with reduced appetite one month and then easy overeating the next, depending on mood, medications, sleep, and loneliness. Food that goes down fast and tastes like more than it is tends to win that battle. Score it. The frozen plant-based fake meat is a crowds-out food first, often a loads food. Sometimes a saturated fat story strong enough to matter. It may be better than some processed meats, yes, but better than a hot dog is not the same bar as good daily staple. The fix is to distinguish between plant-based food and plant-based product. If the ingredient list looks like a sentence you would say out loud in a normal kitchen, you are usually on better ground. If it looks like a board meeting in a laboratory, maybe not every day. The best frozen plant foods are still the boring ones. Edamame, peas, mixed vegetables, plain beans if you use canned, simple grain and bean patties where the beans and grains are actually visible. Number 5, and this is the one that surprises people because it looks the cleanest. Frozen smoothie bowls, fruit bars, frozen yogurt desserts, and those superfood breakfast things built around fruit puree, juice concentrates, granola, and a sweetness level no one would call suspicious because the color is purple. This category sells one idea. It's fruit, it's berries, it's yogurt, it's antioxidants, it's acai, it's breakfast, it's not dessert. And sometimes that is partly true, but partly true is how this industry makes a living. The heart problem here is usually not the naturally occurring sugar in intact fruit. Whole fruit is not the enemy. In fact, fruit is associated with better cardiovascular health. Harvard has been very clear that naturally occurring sugars in fruits and vegetables are not the same issue as added sugars in processed foods. Fiber changes the landing. Structure changes the landing. The trouble begins when the structure is stripped down, sweetness is added, juice concentrates are used, and a product that sounds like produce starts functioning like a sweetened frozen dessert or a fast carbohydrate breakfast. The American Heart Association recommends keeping added sugar low, and for good reason. Too much added sugar promotes weight gain, worsens blood sugar control, and can drive triglycerides and other blood fats in the wrong direction. That is heart territory. It is also brain territory, because the same metabolic environment that punishes the heart does not spare the brain. And if you think I am reaching, think about how these foods are actually eaten. Most people do not eat a commercial smoothie bowl the way they would eat a handful of berries. They eat it with granola, honey, maybe another topping, maybe after already having coffee with something in it. Or they eat frozen yogurt bars because, at least it isn't ice cream, then eat 2 because they are small and fruit-flavored and somehow psychologically invisible. Or they buy frozen breakfast smoothies that are really dessert with better branding. There is also some evidence, and I want to word this carefully, linking higher glycemic diets with poorer cognitive outcomes in older adults. That does not mean blueberries are bad for your brain. It means repeatedly turning fruit into a sweet, fast, processed delivery system and calling it health may not be doing what you think it is doing. Score it. This category is the spikes food of the list. Sometimes not the worst sodium problem, usually not the worst saturated fat problem unless the bowl is loaded with other extras, but absolutely one of the most deceptive because it confuses fruit with fruit-flavored processing. Now let me tell you about a conversation, because this stops being nutrition theory the moment somebody is genuinely trying their best. A patient I'll call Marlene, 73, widowed, sharp, organized, and living alone, came in after being told her blood pressure was up again. She was frustrated in the way good patients get frustrated. "I don't understand it, doctor. I cleaned up my diet. I stopped buying chips. I stopped getting takeout. I mostly eat frozen healthy meals because I don't want to waste food." That sentence carries half the country inside it. So we did not talk about discipline. We talked about labels. What was breakfast? One of those fruit smoothie bowls with granola. Lunch? Soup from the freezer. Dinner? A heart-healthy grain bowl or a plant-based entree. Vegetables? Usually the ones with sauce, because otherwise, in her words, they taste like sadness. She was not failing. She was being marketed to. And I want to answer the question I think many of you are asking right now. Doctor, have I been doing this to myself? Have I been damaging my heart or brain with frozen food for years? That is the wrong question. No one frozen lentil soup gave anyone a stroke. No one smoothie bowl wrote anyone's memory problems in permanent ink. Anyone on the internet who tells you they can draw a straight line from one brand of frozen dinner to one person's diagnosis is not doing medicine. The useful version is smaller and more honest. Heart disease and brain decline often come from repeated exposure to patterns that look harmless in the moment. Too much sodium here, too much processing there. Sugary convenience dressed up as wellness. Not one dramatic blow, 1,000 small taps on the plumbing. What Marlene and I changed was not whether she used the freezer. We changed what the freezer held. Plain vegetables instead of vegetables with sauce. Plain berries instead of dessert pretending to be breakfast. Lower sodium options when she bought a meal at all. More nights where the frozen item was an ingredient, not the whole manufactured event. She still uses her freezer constantly. She simply stopped outsourcing all the decision-making to the front of the box. Which brings me to the thing I promised you at the top, and it flips the usual panic upside down. The safest frozen foods for your heart and brain are often the most boring ones in the aisle. Plain frozen vegetables, plain frozen fruit, plain fish fillets, plain shrimp, plain edamame, plain brown rice or quinoa if the ingredient list is actually plain. In other words, foods that were frozen, not foods that were invented. The freezer is not the problem. The health halo is the problem. Before the recap, one hard line I need to draw because everything I've described is the slow version of this, and there is a fast version that is a genuine medical issue. If you are over 60 and you have blood pressure that is repeatedly elevated, chest pressure, new shortness of breath, swelling, sudden severe headache, one-sided weakness, facial droop, trouble speaking, confusion, or sudden vision change, that is not a nutrition thought experiment situation. That is doctor now, emergency now, call now territory. Food prevention matters. It is not a substitute for urgent care when the body is throwing up flares. All right, what to do tonight? 6 things, and every one of them is free. 1. Stop asking whether a frozen food is healthy and start asking what it is carrying. Sodium, added sugar, saturated fat, refined starch, and an ingredient list doing too much work. 2. The worst frozen, healthy foods after 60 are usually the manufactured convenience foods with health halos. Frozen healthy dinners and bowls, frozen soups, frozen vegetables with sauces, plant-based fake meats, and frozen fruit and yogurt products that function more like dessert or fast sugar than whole food. 3. Treat sodium like a blood pressure issue, not a taste issue. If one frozen item is taking a big bite out of your daily sodium, that matters, especially after 60. 4. Do not confuse plant-based with whole food. A bean is not a factory-made burger just because both began life in the vegetable kingdom. 5. The smartest move in the freezer aisle is usually to buy ingredients, not assembled narratives. Plain broccoli, plain berries, plain fish, plain spinach. Build the meal yourself and you keep control of the chemistry. 6. If you need convenience, and most of you do, use the freezer to support your judgment, not replace it. Frozen food should make good eating easier. It should not be a trap you fall into because the packaging spoke the language of health better than the product earned. None of that requires perfection. None of it requires giving up the freezer. And none of it asks you to cook like a 32-year-old food blogger with a marble kitchen and no joint pain. It asks for one thing only, that you stop letting the cold aisle make medical decisions for you. If this is the kind of thing you want more of, honest explanations of what is really happening in the free version of the fix, hit subscribe, give this one a like, and tell me in the comments which of the 5 surprised you the most. I read them. I'm Dr. Naturis. Look after yourself, and I'll see you soon.